All right, everybody.
Yeah.
We are ready to get started with our plant lovers tour for today. So we are very happy to see all of you on this overcast, kind of gray Tuesday. That's okay. We were kind of expecting it to be rainy. It is not rainy right now, which means we are going to have a beautiful tour. Our plant lovers tour today, we are going to be going around the garden looking at Japanese maples, not just Acer palmatum, but just maples from Japan generally. It should be wonderful. We've got our two longtime maple volunteers. I don't know, is that your official title? Maple volunteers?
Sounds good.
It is in my book.
Okay.
Jim and Lynn, they are the ones who take care of our Japanese maples here at the Arboretum. They do all the pruning. I also see them out measuring them on occasion, doing all the record keeping for them. And they're members of the North American Maple Society as well.
Correct.
Heavy hitter members of the North American Maple Society.
Lynn's on the board.
Yeah, Lynn's on the board, actually, as a matter of fact. Like, I don't want to build up expectations too much, but we do have some experts here amongst us who are going to be showing us through the garden. So it should be really fantastic. And I think that is everything that I need to say as far as announcements concerned. So I will pass things over to Jim and Lynn to take us around the garden and show us the Japanese maples.
Okay. Well, I may not be bubbly, but we do love gardens and plants, especially Lynn is the knowledgeable one in our household. She's got a certification with the North Carolina Nurserymen's Association. She's a certified plant specialist. I'm a certifiable crazy collector. Okay, so that's the difference. But, you know, in the process, when we moved into our house, we've been in our house almost 40 years. There wasn't anything there. It was all brand new. And Lynn, though, gradually got interested in gardening, and her knowledge is quite extensive, including on Japanese maples, but she would probably say I at least about that know somewhat more than she does. But I don't think so. I think she just holds back. So that's where our interests are, gardening and specifically maples. We're not experts on horticulture, so people always come up and say, "What's wrong with my maple?" I don't know, it looks sick. We don't know. We really don't know things like that, but we know what we like. And I've done tours here before, not exactly like this, but I mean for the maples. And I enjoy doing that because they are a wonderful plant. They have immense variety and just have a great place in the garden. So on this tour, just as a quick thing, we're gonna, if we tried to see every maple in this garden, we'd have to go in quite a trot. And this is what it would be. There's one, there's one, there's one, there's one, and that's what it would be. And it would be done. Now, so unless you want to do that, we're not going to do that. So Lynn and I came last week to kind of plan which ones we wanted to walk past and maybe spend some time. And we're going to pause at certain points and discuss topics like maples in pots. They really lend themselves to pots. We probably have 20 maples in pots. In all, we have about 250. We actually have more than the Arboretum. And I asked Mark if he'd want them if we pass away, and he said, "Nah, people always ask that, and it's too much work to go do it. So I guess they'll just pass on to somebody else." So our plan is we're going to take a certain route, and we're certainly not going to see every maple, but we're trying to get the most, and we're trying to find examples. And I want you to get excited about that, just the immense variety. So what's a Japanese maple? That's a good question. Well, the genus is Acer. All maples are Acers. The species are what we identify as the Japanese maples, specifically Acer palmatum, the biggest collection of varieties out there. Well, who knows how many? I don't think anybody knows how many there really is, but thousands have been mentioned, okay? Acer japonicum is another. Acer shirasawanum. And then there's Acer sieboldinum. And then there's Acer pseudo-sieboldinum. But my feeling is, why have a pseudo when you can get the real thing? But anyway, we'll see one example of that. And then there's several others that arguably say, well, that's not technically a Japanese maple, but really we're talking about types of maples that are ornamental understory trees. And they're just wonderful, wonderful plants. You want to add anything before we take off here?
Great intro.
Well, before we take off, feast your eyes on that monster out there in the circle. That is an Acer palmatum. And when I was giving a tour, one time I've done small tours in the past, we would start there, and one of the people on the tour said they were here when that plant was brought here. This plant was old when it was brought in. So this must be 50 or 60 years old. Now, we do prune a lot of the maples. We don't touch that one. So if it was in my yard, I would touch it. But when it's a state property like that, we kind of shy away and let Tim do it. So all right. So we're going to move along here, and we'll be stopping very soon at one of our first maples. So for some people, this is their idea of a Japanese maple. A lot of it just depends on what you have in your yard. This weeping form that has leaves that are dissected, they can be green or red, but this variety is called waterfall, okay? And in the names, if you see tags, it's Acer palmatum, and then in single quotes, the name waterfall. That's how and cultivar means cultivated variety. So we'll talk a little bit about how you propagate further down. But this is quite a noble tree. Lynn and I have pruned this several times. These are quite a bit of work to prune, but if you stay on top of it, it can be quite lovely. And it's wonderful in the winter because it's so sculptural. It really is part of the value of this. And again, you can get red ones, which are completely different varieties. Interesting, the guy who named this was a guy named Holman, who I think brought this over from Japan, and he named it in the 1920s. So he must have been the first Japanese maple expert in the United States, because there's another one that we'll see that he was responsible for, and that's pretty unusual, really. The world of Japanese maples has just taken off. It's huge business. Sometimes a little bit of a racket, because as soon as someone finds something that looks slightly different, they'll market it, and you read about it, you would think it was the best plant in the planet ever, and then you can say it looks like a green maple, but anyway, it's also exciting. But we don't sit around. Now I'm not so obsessed that I'm sitting around every day looking to see what the new varieties are. We know people like that, and I just don't say. We just like to, when we see them, and decide whether we'd like to have it. But these are great trees. We'll see another green one coming up. Oh yeah. Just a brief thing. This is a Japanese maple.
This one here.
Trompenberg is this called, and it's named after a botanical garden in Rotterdam. And we were just there. We thought everybody was excited because there's a group of enthusiasts. We want to see the original Trompenberg. Well, it's gone.
Yeah, no longer there.
So it's the one they have is smaller than one we have. But anyway, Japanese maples may be Japanese in origin, but a lot of cultivars come from many countries. Netherlands, Italy. We'll see one today. They originally came from France, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and then, of course, United States. And Japan, of course, they still have their hands in it. So this is an extremely popular maple. It's called Mikawa Yatsubusa. You learn a little bit of Japanese, and I say there's a lot of them with the last name of Yatsubusa. So Mikawa Yatsubusa. This plant is, what's amazing about it is its tufted look. The leaves have been described as looking like roofing shingles. It's got an elegant winter shape to it, kind of, very much like that one does. And this has flowers on it. Maples do get flowers, and they look like little red Christmas lights in it when it's in there. It's really quite remarkable. This tree came about by probably to me, the foremost discoverer of Japanese maples, a guy named Talon Buchholz at a Buchholz nursery in Oregon. And this is probably his most famous tree. It's everywhere, we have it in a pot, and we have one in the ground. And on that topic of pots, And Lynn's going to talk a little bit about what we do on potted maples. So
Before I start on that, someone just asked if we're looking at flowers on this maple, but what we're looking at is seed pods. They're called samaras. It's a little wing deal, and there's usually a seed in both sides of that wing. Not always fertile, but that's what you're seeing, and they will fall to the ground.
And a note on that, I'm glad you brought that, and I'm glad they're showing. Notice that the samaras go up. What I've read is that they think is a cross between palmatum and shirasawanum. Okay.
If the seed pod is held up, it usually is a shirasawanum, or shirasawanum is in the genetics. The palmatums hold their samaras down.
Yeah.
So
there's a lot of seeds on this one too.
Oh, yeah. But anyway, to pots, we have a number in pots, and Japanese maples do pot culture well. If they are a smaller maple or a slower growing maple, there's a great book. The Vertrees book is the classic Japanese maple book. In the back of that book is a very helpful chart. Somebody studied what lends itself well to pot culture. So if it's one of the trees that's mentioned in there, you can go and find out. Otherwise, the characteristics would be slow growing. We have tried a number in pots, and Acer palmatum usually does well, but some of the ones, japonicums and shirasawanums that want to be a big tree, might grow too quickly to make it worth your while to even put it in a pot. If it's going to outgrow that pot in a year, there's no point. And we found out the hard way. We put a plant in a pot and then noticed that this pot was waterlogged. So we went out and found that its root had gone straight down through the pothole, and we did save the maple, it was good, but we had to really drill it out to get that plant out of the pot. If you do keep a maple in a pot, every couple years you need to lift that plant and check it, that if it's becoming root bound. Now, what you can do for a small maple or a slow growing one, if it's starting to fill the pot, you can take that plant out. You can actually root prune it. Some of you may know the rule of thumb that you don't take more than a third of a tree at one time. Pretty similar with the roots. You can take that out and you can trim those roots. Put fresh potting soil in the pot, put the plant back in the same pot, and it will grow again and be happy as a clam. They do tend to grow a little less tall when they are in a pot, but again, it's really best for the smaller maples. The question was, A, when is the best time to do that? And B, do you water wash the roots and completely get off the old soil before you repot it? So the best time I've read, and when I try to do it, is late winter, early spring before bud break. So about March is a great time to check them and see if they need repotting, because then they're putting on a flush of new growth, they're healthy, sap's going into the branches and everything's good. If you, now the truth, if you watch a video on how to do this, it will show you that take a hose and clean off those roots really good, and then you can see them all and you can prune them and you're good to go. I don't know about you, but most of us are in a hurry and we have more than one thing to do on a given day. So I tend to take it out of the pot, brush the roots, take my fingers of the gloved hand and comb them a little bit, but there's still certainly soil up in there under. And I don't want to hurt any of the roots that I'm asking to regrow. So I don't completely water wash my roots, and it's done fine.
And we have a few, I don't think we've ever done
There
that.
are a few that can happily live 10, 12 years, and they just grow so slowly that they're not needing anything. Okay, so, thank you.
All right, we're going to move down here a little bit. This tree is Acer Siboldianum, and this is, I think this is not a common tree at all. We happen to have it, but it's because I think somebody grafted this one, and they were a private grafter, and when they passed away, they donated all their trees to the Arboretum for sale to volunteers. It was an immense collection. But remember we talked about weepers, they often dissected. Notice that the leaves are not dissected on this. It's not common. Just so you know, it's not an absolute. It's not at all like a dissected form. This is again, Siboldianum. What is a Siboldianum? I don't know. You know, I don't know what the characteristics are. There's something in the genetics that made it different, and this guy Siebold decided that's one of them I'm gonna claim. This is we've pruned this a couple of times. Very different. It's than the palmatums, but it is really a beautiful tree. It's unusual. I wanted to point that out. I feel like that it's really a good tree. I think the Sibuldianums are known for their yellow and orange kind of color. Anyway, I think it's a very special part of the collection here. I defy you to find this one. I think this is especially a nice item. All right, we're gonna look at a real little one here. We really kind of discovered this when we were pruning. Yeah, this looks like a shrub, but this is an Acer palmatum. It's called Tamahime, and again, you learn some Japanese. Hime means princess or small, and this would be a dwarf. I think this is just a beautiful tree. In the wintertime, it just has all these spiky branches that go out, and so it's quite lovely. And this is full grown. Okay, it may get bigger, but it's really a pretty special tree.
So you can guess that this would be a great one for pot culture. It's both small and slow growing and would look great in a lovely pot.
Japanese maples can be sometimes pruned more than you think they should be. And for environments like if you had a rock garden or near a water feature, you can, normally a tree might grow to 12 feet or something, but you can probably keep it shorter if you choose to prune it that way. This one, you almost have to don't do anything. It just gets really, really dense. And so when we're often cleaning out branches that, need some space. This is a great tree. So, and there's another one right behind you guys. Now there's some wild names. This is called Geisha Gone Wild. Our book says this is supposed to be 6 feet in 10 years. Does that look like 6 feet? This is a variegated plant. Now that's why I brought my my stick here. If you come and look at the leaves, it has quite complicated variegation. You can look underneath leaves sometimes, and that's part of for some trees. That's what they're great for. You stand and you see the sunshine through it. But also on variegation, what you have to watch out for is that you often get reversion, where some new growth come out and it says that just looks like a green Japanese maple, and sometimes reversion can take over the whole tree. And so, and there's one here in the Arboretum where essentially it has been taken over. There's just tiny branches left. Now, is that because someone didn't do their job? No, it's just it's hard to get to all the plants and do this. And that was so long ago. This is probably before most of the staffers that are here now. In other words, if they were going to do something about it, it should have been a long time ago. But it's just something to watch out for. We have trees that have some reversion in there, and we're not out in the garden every day plucking off the leaves like that. So, but it's something to be aware of.
Just I was going to say a word on pruning. When we first saw this one, it was very tall and lanky with just a little bit of greenery at the top. So, and you may have plants that do that. They've gotten to a point where you haven't pruning them and you would like to, and you think, where do I start? So we have been pruning this one, but we realized it would be a multi-year process. So we started bringing it down a little bit, not too much because it didn't have very much greenery, but it's responding so nicely. It's forcing it to green out at a lower point.
Yeah.
So it's coming along, but sometimes when you start pruning a tree, you cannot do it all at once. You have to do it over several years.
So, and I recommend, if you have a variegated maple, the beauty is in the variegation. The kind of thing you need to walk your yard and see them when they're out, often in the springtime. You don't see it from your windows, okay? And you need to go look at it. It is so important, and that goes for all plants. I mean, especially in spring when they're coming out, it is just so fun to go look at any plant that's coming out. But on the pruning, if you have a variegated one, if you prune it too high, you're not going to see the leaves. And so you should think about, how do I keep branches that would allow you to see the variegation? That's just something to think about on that. So,
question.
Yeah.
Do you have a goal for this as far as what you want it to look like after more pruning?
A pleasing shape. That's what we're after, literally. So we know it to be an upright. We know it has a narrow space in which to live. So our goal is to let it be a tree, but to bring some branching down so that A, you can see these beautiful leaves, and that it looks in proportion to itself.
You know, what we've been trying to do is get it into at least a shape. It was really misshapen. This grew fast, because I remember it being, you know, just, you know, probably this high. And then it's like, what happened to that? It just took off. So, okay. Yeah.
Another question. She asked, how do we do it? Do you cut every single branch or pick a third of them? We call Japanese maple Zen pruning. So it's a science and an art. So I would say that we were after the main branches, but then after that, we want it to look pleasant each year, even though it might not be what we want it to look like in the end run. So we would probably nip almost every branch up there to get the crown down. Yeah.
We're hoping it'll stimulate and give it a pleasing shape. Again, form is so important, and the Japanese maples have just tremendous variety in forms. You've seen the weepers. This can be a tall, spreading tree. We were kind of forced to. It had already gotten tall, but we're hoping that we can stimulate some lower branches so you can see the variegation.
Another question.
She's asking how do you stimulate growth that would encourage the characteristics you're after. And some of the characteristics on Japanese maples is their bark, especially in the wintertime. The coral barks, they're red. There's one we're going to see today. The last one is yellow. There's magnificent colors, and they come about in the wintertime. I would say many of these are very vigorous growers. I'd almost say not copse it, but you know, you could take pruning shears and just shear the top and force it to have the new growth, because it's the new growth. New branches are going to show up red. We have one called Benikawa. You probably have Sango Kaku. Yeah. And they almost all have very vigorous light green leaves and grow. And so they can take that kind of shearing. So we haven't actually done that, but I was thinking this winter, because our Benikawa doesn't have as good. And I think there's a lot of trees that you can drive the new growth for either variegation or that bark.
The question was particular to coral bark maples. Are you all familiar with that term? There are certain cultivars that are known for their winter bark color. So in other words, they drop all their leaves and then the youngest stems become coral red. It's really lovely. But as that tree ages, there's fewer and fewer young branches, and you end up with kind of a corona of color at the top of a mature tree. So the question was, can we force more young branches? And we use the word coppice, which I've never seen done on a maple, but as Jim said, I think you could start cutting it, trying to make it produce more young branches, and then get as much of that coral bark color as you can on your tree. Bihu, I heard you mention Bihu. We found Bihu is a really wonderful one because, and we'll see one, that tree tends to stay yellow all the way through. And it's much slower about giving up to old bark and losing its really lovely winter color.
All right, we're going to go over, take this path over here. Here's another green weeping maple. Its name is kind of imprecise. It's called Varieties. And actually, Varieties has become the name of almost generic green weeping maples. There is no true cultivar called Varieties. That doesn't mean it's a bad plant. It's beautiful. Our oldest maple is also called Varieties. Not this big. We've pruned this at least a couple of times. You can see this one's kind of open, and the extraordinary contortions that these branches take. And this is what's one of the appeals of these weeping trees. But we're going to talk about propagation a little bit. This is a grafted maple. Where do you think the graft was?
Do this. Right
there it is.
Right there.
So maples, Japanese maples are not developed. They are discovered, honestly. How do they discover Japanese maples? Man, a lot of growers, they take any seeds they can. They collect them like Mikawa Yasabusa. they'll collect massive amounts of these seeds and they plant them all. And then they go around and just see if there's anything interesting, okay? Because technically, you could take the seeds from that Makawa Yatsubusa, you better ask Blake first though, but you could take those seeds and you may get them to sprout. And it may look like Makawa Yatsubusa, but we don't know for sure if it is, unless you do a genetic test and you're willing to spend that kind of money. So actually,
and you could not label it Makawa Yatsubusa. You could label it Makawa Yatsubusa seedling. That's what it would be.
Yeah, you're not guaranteeing that it's Makawa Yatsubusa, because how do you get a Makawa Yatsubusa? You get a grafted tree, okay? Grafting is the way most of the cultivars are propagated. And it's cloning, okay? You see this wonderful tree and first you get rootstock. Well, that was the rootstock. It was probably a generic green maple, one that grew like this if it went to size. And then you take branches from the tree you want. They called scion wood. That's S-C-I-O-N. If you're going to graft around here, it's usually in the winter time. So you'd get, in January, you're going around collecting scion wood from the trees that are of interest to you. And you take the rootstock, just as a quick explanation of grafting, and you cut a flap on this thing, and they often call it a church window, because when you flip the flap down, it looks like that. It looks like an arched window. Then you take the scion wood, and you shape it like a chisel, essentially. So that you have like not a point, but a flat blade kind of thing. And you insert in that, always want flat sides on these things so that there's no gaps. And you put it behind that flap and you wrap it up with either rubber bands, which I hate, or these days they have stretching tape, budding tape they call it, that can make it really tight. And then you hope you're successful. So we have a friend who owns a maple nursery in Tennessee, and she says, I do my happy dance every time the first graft comes out. So she can do 500 grafts in a day. And she's doing a grafting workshop here in February. Her name is Jen Tucker, really delightful person. It's something that we've tried, but I suffer from Project ADD. So, I work on this, and I work on that, and I work on this. And so we haven't gotten to grafting in a while. We did have a grafting workshop in our basement one time, and Marty was there. So anyway, this is a wonderful specimen, not a particular cultivar. Who cares? Because this is a magnificent tree. Even the rootstock that you get may grow into a beautiful tree. And there are nurseries that grow rootstock for the industry. They grow by the hundreds of thousands. And so when we did our grafting workshop, I ordered 125 rootstock from California for our grafting workshop. We had a couple that took, but they didn't last. So, well, all right.
It's harder than it sounds.
Yeah. Actually, it sounds hard to me. So far, we've seen all Acer palmatums except for one. This is an Acer palmatum, and this leaf, as they often call it, linear lobum or strap leaf, but it's got really skinny leaves, and that's its characteristic. Classic vase shape. A lot of trees have this, but this is really a very special shaped leaf. So there's in other words, there's a way of classifying palmatums by the leaf shape. It doesn't mean anything except for just a way of saying, well, this one looks like these and this one looks like these. It doesn't have any scientific basis. It's just a way of sorting out the hundreds and if not thousands of cultivars that are out there. We have a good friend who that's what he loves are the strap leaves, and he grafts in Washington State, and he's got he's had some that I think he could put in the industry, but he's just a hobbyist. This question on grafting, how high you graft, can you do it under the ground, graft there? I doubt it would survive. I think it would rot. You never see it. The question is how high you want it to be. You notice that Viridis, that's pretty high. And sometimes they can graft. You could graft this high if you wanted to. And sometimes they do because they want it above the ground. They don't want the tree dragging on the ground. They want it to ground. So, but when it's first grafted, you have to protect it. So you're not going to be putting it, you shouldn't be putting it out where you don't have some kind of protection. So that's, we think that ours didn't survive because we probably just didn't protect them enough. Not that outside, but we were trying to keep them inside, and that's can be tough too. Things can dry out.
So the aftercare on the graft is almost as important as the graft itself. So it is wrapped pretty tightly, and what the goal is that you are going cambium to cambium. And so you're just protecting this wound until those two can mesh. And as Jim said, they're under protection. Most professional growers will have them in a greenhouse under some humidity, but not too much, because you don't want it to rot, but you want enough moisture in the air to encourage that graft to take. And it's wound with tape or something, which will fall off eventually. So they usually just wait and watch that graft takes, but it's never underground. It's always above ground. Yeah. But as he was saying, you will hear this term in the industry. I have for sale a high graft Varieties. That means it was intentionally grafted high so that it had lots of room to weep. And you especially want that there are real tight weepers, so that might be especially desirable. But there's some, like the shrub ones, we have one that it's a high graft on this shrubby little variety. So it's almost like a little topiary. It's really pretty. Yeah. But otherwise, another professional might say, oh no, I want this shrub form, so I'm going to give it a low graft. And those words just mean exactly what they sound like. The low graft is then done low on the rootstock so that it is more shrub-like near the ground.
They often keep the grafts for up to a couple of years in the greenhouse. So, you don't want to be putting them out too soon because they're at risk on that. So
is this one grafted?
Yeah, this would be grafted, but doesn't mean the graft may have been totally covered over. Now, why did that graft show up? I think it was a difference between how aggressively the rootstock grows and then the tree that you're grafting on there. So eventually it will heal itself over, but that one, it probably would never do that. So, yes, some weeping and some not. This is not a weeper. Okay. This is like an upright tree, vase shaped. That's a classic thing. Some of the tall trees get this beautiful layered look, kind of that distance kind of thing. A lot of them are vase shaped. And then there's shrubby ones like you saw down there. So, sometimes in the Arboretum, we look down, but we don't look up, which is funny because an Arboretum is supposed to be about trees. But over here, there are 2 green Japanese maples, no-name trees, and they are huge. They're like 40 feet tall, 40-foot canopies, 2 green ones over in here. It'll just say Acer palmatum. They were probably planted when JC Raulston was here. JC Raulston loved Japanese maples, and if you notice, part of our logo for the Arboretum is a Japanese maple leaf. So,
yeah, this is one right here. Just a quick minute on this one, and I think we wanted to bring this one up just because of pruning. We have found in our collection of trees, some are well organized by themselves, and we go try to visit each one in our yard each year to see what it needs, and some need very little. And some are really disorganized. So when we saw this one, it was very disorganized. So we're in the process of trying to give it some shape, but we'll probably have to do something with it every year. And some are just like that. And so when you read in a description of a tree, that's something to take note of if it says that it is a good shaped tree that holds its shape.
This one's real wonky. It's called, and by the way, the naming conventions, this is considered, over here, Acer palmatum, Chicio improved. That's actually illegal name. That sounds drastic, but they're trying to get standardized in names. Mixing Japanese and English is not what you're supposed to do. This one should have been called Shin Chicio. Shin means improved or new. So there's a bunch of shins out there in the Japanese maples. But this guy's really crazy. In the book we have, they just really, really, really love this tree. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know why. Remember I mentioned pseudo-Sabolianum? That's what this is. It's actually a Korean maple. We have this in our yard too. It looks a lot like a typical Japonicum, but it has something unusual about it that makes it a pseudo-Sabolianum. Look at the shape of the leaves. You'll often hear the term full moon maple, which is a kind of a generic term trying to describe certain kinds of maples. It's not very official. It's not very accurate. All that means is that the leaves tend to be orbicular. Essentially they look round, and they have more lobes than typical, and sometimes they have lobes that looks like they go all the way around. And so a lot of the Shirasawanums and Japonicums, I would call this a full moon maple, but it's totally unofficial term. But you may run across it. Naming can be really weird. We'll see one in here to tell you to watch out for names. So this is an Acer Japonicum, and it would be called a full moon maple. This is classic Japonicum, very stiff branches, angular takes and so forth. And the colors, the fall colors on almost all Japonicums are spectacular. They're going to be red, orange, and yellow. You'll see all three colors, and they're quite beautiful. Also, flowers will show up on Japonicums, quite distinctive flowers, literally petals and so forth, and it's quite attractive. Here's a problem with naming. This is called Acer Japonicum aconitifolium. How about that for a mouthful, okay? But the Japanese call it dancing peacock. The Japanese have some really creative names. And in the trade, it's often just called fernleaf maple. So watch out. You may buy the same plant 3 times thinking, well, I gotta have dancing peacock. That's gotta be great. And you find that what you have are 3 Acer Japonicums aconitifolium. This is not the only one in the Arboretum. There was one at the corner of the shelter there where we've started the thing. I just didn't start with that there. But come here in the fall, this is gonna be spectacular. So we have a Acer Japonicum in our yard, and it's not cut leaf like this, but the leaves must be the size of dessert plates. Literally are about this big. But they have that beautiful fall color. It's an amazing leaf. So that was a Father's Day present for me that the girls gave me one time. So this is called Siriu. It's a palmatum, and notice it's a dissected leaf, but it's not a weeping tree. Okay, there aren't many dissected leaves that are in a tall tree like this, and this is the biggest example of this variety that I've ever seen. Honestly, it's not an uncommon one. You can find these quite easily, but this thing goes forever. I mean, it goes way over the Lath house. I don't know when it was trimmed. We did a lot of work on it, but it's when it gets old like this, it's harder to prune. It's hard to correct things if you think it needs correcting. But it's really an amazing tree. I really don't know. The question is, how old is this tree? I would have to say that this would be 40 years old. I think
At least.
this was planted when JC Raulston was here. I would bet. So I've never seen one this big.
Yeah.
And look at how interesting the bark is. The wrinkles kind of thing. It's just that itself is just kind of interesting, I think. So, but this fall color on this is typically red, and it can be quite spectacular. It can be a very bright red. There's no telling when you're looking at a tree what its real color is sometimes, because some of them have spring colors, and so you might have a bright, wonderful red-looking spring tree, but it's classified as a green tree because by the time summer comes, it's green, and then it might be red again in the fall. And so you never know what kind of colors you're going to get, unless you're just really familiar. And honestly, I forget in our own yard now, what's this one going to be? And so...
and also in our region, some of the red ones will kind of dull down and go kind of almost olive green with a hint of red for the summer. So that can happen as well.
That, which is for some people, it's frustrating because I wanted a red tree. I think red is the hardest tree on the Japanese maples for us to get, especially during the middle of the season. We've almost given up trying. You know, it needs a lot of sun. There's a number of large specimens in here. They're pretty old. Some of you might have Osakazuki. And this one is rumored to have the best fall color red, Sakazuki. It's a green tree, but its fall color is brilliant red. We talked about Sango Kaku earlier in this talk, the coral bark. That's this tree back here. So when the fall comes and it starts changing color, you kind of in the winter when the leaves are all down, you might see if there's any red in there. And the red will be the newer branches at the top. I'm getting to this guy. Okay, there's a really wild, huge muffin of a tree back here. Kiyohime, see that? Lynn's gonna go over, stand there. It's amazing. This thing must be 20 feet across and maybe 6 feet tall. This is an amazing tree. It's a wonderful specimen. So it's a great specimen called Kiyohime. Now this guy, this is the ultimate weeper. We have nicknames for trees. We call this one Cousin It. Remember Cousin It in Adam's Family? That's what it looks like. This is the ultimate weeper, but it's not dissected. We prune this every year, and it's a lot of work. I mean, it just comes down to the ground. This thing just is so consorted like this. At Duke Gardens, they have 3 of these. They're even bigger than this one. This is a wonderful specimen. This is great. But it's just fantastic. But I tell you, there's a lot of pruning in this. Okay? And we try not to walk on the gravel, you know, because we're often here when the people are raking it. So it's like, don't want to do that. So, but this is called Ryusen. And so again, a weeping one that's not dissected. So, and as far as I don't know of any other cultivars. You know, often you find variations, and so you'll say, okay, Ryusen is, there's another cultivar, but I haven't seen it yet. So it's amazing. So some really big specimens in here. So we're going to go into the Lath house because there's really good specimens in there. This is a tough time of year for Japanese maples here in the East. So it's our worst season. They look so beat up by the summer. Our summers are brutal. This tree, though, you need to come back and see this tree in the spring. This is called Hanama Toy. It's a weeping, very delicate tree. It has the most amazing spring colors. The Japanese consider this their most beautiful tree, and rightfully so. It is really remarkable. Reds and creams and
pink.
And pink. You know, it was really amazing. And this is a nice specimen. We have one. We've tried. We're on our second one trying to get it to run. But I think this is a good spot. Although the rumors are that this does great in the sun. But I don't know. It seems so delicate. These plants are tougher than you think. You think, oh, this thing must be so fragile. You know. Sometimes I think we need to have our plants on casters because Lynn's always moving them around. You know. So the tree right behind you guys is called Peaches and Cream. It has very distinct variegation, and it's from Australia. I mean, the cultivar was discovered in Australia, so that's really quite a neat tree. Yes, yeah. Now we're going to go one straight down here. This one's got some Japanese names that are hard for me to remember. Okukuji Nishiki. Now it looks like Nishiki, but Mark Weathington has assured me that it's pronounced Nishiki, so I'll go along with that. Mark seems to know what he's doing. So, but this has the palest variegation on this. This is really a cool tree. There's another tree called Butterfly that exhibits some of the same variegation. And you can just come up Now, you know, this branch actually looks different. You know, this is the kind of thing you say, wow, this looks like a...
Jim pointed out the reversion on this one, and if you have reversion in a tree, that begs the question, what do? You cut it off, because the reversion is usually stronger than the variegated portion, and you don't want to let it get strong. It will.
There.
And the ultimate question, take off. Now, some trees, they put out their first year branch might be an anomaly. And so we usually let it a year because it can go on to its true variegation. But if it persists and is not in line with the tree, it should be removed.
This one actually looks like a different tree, another tree we have in our yard. It's funny how that's here. But sometimes that's how they discover new branches. Anybody know what a witch's broom is? A witch's broom is and it's not just a Japanese maple, but many Japanese maple cultivars are found from witch's brooms. And what they are very dense growth in a tree. In some cases, it can mean outside of Japanese maples, it can mean that this tree is going to die. It's almost like a cancer in a way. But for Japanese maple enthusiasts, man, witch's brooms are exciting opportunities. You know, I think some of them probably take out guns and shoot them down because they could be up high, and they graft those. And when you see a shrubby Japanese maple that's real dense, it probably came from a witch's broom. There's a guy up in Pennsylvania, his name is Bill Schwartz. He's the witch's broom specialist in Japanese maples. He's caught so many, he even named one after his mother. So this is an old cultivar. I've never found this in any nursery. It's called Pendulum Julia. So, but it was, remember the guy who discovered the waterfall one and named it? He named this one. He brought it from Japan, not this very tree, but this variety from Japan in the 1930s. So that's pretty old for the business. We've pruned this. This is a monster, but it's a wonderful tree. So we're starting to see weepers like this in the industry where they're like umbrellas, and not as contorted, but lovely. And they look wonderful in the winter because of the way the branches flow. We have one that's a red form, and it's just in a pot, and the branches go down below the level of the pot, and that really makes it special. This is called lemon chiffon. This is a fairly new one for the Arboretum in the last 5 years. I think this one is here. It's a great tree. And just again, you want to see, this is kind of an oddball here. This is called ojishi, and there's one of the classifications of a palmatum on the leaves is this, what they call the shape of the leaf is called crispum. Just think of it like almost like kale, how dense it is. But as you go by this plant, move the branches, and these are the stiffest branches that we've seen here. And we're talking about the branches at the top. This thing is so sturdy. And it's typically, this kind of size. But this is this leaf shape. There's a number of trees that have leaf shape like this. There's one around the corner that's called Crazy Crinkle because it's got this kind of leaf shape. And then that's another Talon Buchholz tree, by the way. So just amazing.
There it is.
Yeah.
You can guess where we're stopping.
This is called Bihu. And this is one of these that has bark interest in the wintertime. But this stays pretty yellow throughout the season. Ours, we have a nice one in our yard. At this time of year, it's just kind of a gray-brown. It hasn't got any color. In fact, the first year after we got it, the winter we thought, oh, I guess that's gone. But every winter it comes back and it's bright yellow. And so it's the funny thing is we know a lot of people in the Northwest, and you get maple envy if you go to Colorado not Colorado, Oregon or Washington. But they've not been successful at all with Bihus. So I like that, It's about time, so. But this also has some remarkable, see these lines on it? Doesn't it look like bamboo? There's a number of them that have color, and this is just an amazing tree. And typical of these trees that have color on the bark, like the coral bark, this one, there's some others, and it's this very chartreuse-like leaf, and they're fast growers. And this is what I've noticed is that this is a typical color of the trees on this. So we let's talk about finding Japanese maples. There's one in the back, and we won't see. Its name is it has one of the colors of yellow, red, and orange in the fall. And it's called Gold Digger. If you know Mr. Maple, they come up with names like this. But what's cool is that tree was discovered by a longtime volunteer here in the Arboretum. Laddie
Munger, I think.
Laddie Munger. And I was doing my first tour
in his yard.
with about 10 people, and we got to that tree, and I said, you guys are really lucky because this tree right here was discovered in his yard. And he looked at me and he said, how'd you know that? And I said, oh, well, we have ways of finding out. So, but he thought it was an unusual tree. He called the Maple brothers, and they came to the house. They asked, what do you want? They thought it was worth trying to propagate and put into the industry. And he said, what do you want to call it? And Laddie it doesn't make any difference to Laddie. So they came up with the classic Maple Brothers, Gold Digger. So it has something to do with a female, it seems like. But anyway, isn't that cool? And you have a bihu, right? Yeah, I think they're really good. There are 3 of them here in the Arboretum. So there's one over this way and one in the back 40 near Gold Digger, right next to Gold Digger. So it's always worth going to see. There's some wonderful trees that we haven't covered here, but we're going to end our talk here officially with this.
Thank you.
So.